Visionary, world changer, leader, preacher of the word. Welcome to Lead Like Paul.
That music you hear right now is just an example of the type of music you might have heard in the first century in Greece or in Rome. It's the kind of music that maybe the Apostle Paul might have heard. And the reason why I'm playing that is because I want to set the mood for this chapter that we're going to be discussing. So welcome to this study on the book Lead Like Paul. And we're going to be talking about chapter 14, which is called Cultivate Supernatural Joy. And the subtitle is, Just as Paul experienced joy in a prison cell, you must resist discouragement. You know, we really don't know much about the type of music that Paul would have listened to. We don't really know what praise and worship might have sounded like in the New Testament times, but we do know that Paul the Apostle sang. We know he sang a lot. He talked in his letters about how he would pray in the Spirit and with his understanding, and he would sing in the Spirit and with his understanding. I believe Paul was a very joyful guy, and the way that he activated the joy of the Lord in his life was through praise. Paul would have had the book of Psalms memorized, and back in those times, the early church considered Psalms like their hymn book, and so they would have had songs that they sang from the book of Psalms, but also they would have had new songs that were written for that time. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first of all, I want us to go back to Acts chapter 16, where we see Paul and Silas. They come to that city to preach the gospel. Paul casts the devil out of a slave girl, and they end up getting thrown in prison. I actually had the opportunity last year to go to the ruins of Philippi in northern Greece. It was an incredible experience. I got to walk around the old marketplace area. They have these ruins kind of dug up, and you can imagine what it looked like. And I walked around in that marketplace where Paul would have met that slave girl and where he would have cast the demon out of her. And then I walked over to the spot where they believed that that prison was. And the Bible tells us in Acts 16 that Paul and Silas were thrown in that jail. They would have been bleeding because they had just been beaten with rods. And then they were thrown in jail and they were chained. It was a very small, very confined place. But the Bible tells us that at midnight, suddenly there was an earthquake, and the chains fell off, and all the doors flung open, and Paul and Silas were freed, and they were able to continue on their journey after they baptized the jailer who got saved in that evening experience. But the thing we want to focus on here is that Luke tells us in Acts 16 that before the chains fell off, before that earthquake came, it says that Paul and Silas were singing hymns. This is amazing when you think about it, that these two guys who have been beaten up, they're bleeding, they're very sore, they need medical attention, and then they're chained in a little prison in northern Greece. And what do? They sing. That's probably not what I would have been doing if I was in that condition. But this is what God calls all of us to, that when we go through hard times, the best thing you can do is reset your joy. You can begin to praise God. You can begin to allow His joy to well up inside of you, and the result will be a spiritual breakthrough. Paul modeled that for us. And we are living in times right now where there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pastors burning out. There's a lot of anxiety. I meet so many Christians who are dealing with depression and heaviness and anxiety disorders and all of these types of things. And I want to challenge you as a leader that you're going to have to learn how to reset your joy. A good place for us to learn this is by reading Paul's letter to the Philippians. That little letter, it's only 4 chapters. It's a short letter, but do you know that the word joy or rejoice is in that letter 16 times? Some people call Philippians the epistle of joy. And it's in that letter that Paul tells us, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. He keeps saying it, rejoice, rejoice. And yet that letter was written also from a prison. Paul knew how to muster up the joy in a very difficult situation. And that is the reason why he was able to be victorious in so many situations. There were many times in Paul's life, I believe, that he turned on the joy. I don't know if he just began to sing. I know that he had the Psalms memorized. He could pull those up from his playlist. He didn't have a phone to turn on his favorite music, but he knew how to turn on the joy. And that joy is what sustained him in those difficult moments. You're also going to learn in this chapter that there are several places in Paul's writings where he actually quotes a song that was sung in the early church. One example is in 2 Timothy 2, where Paul writes these words, if we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we also will reign with him. If we deny him, he will also deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Those are actually the words of a song. And there are other songs like that that were sung in the early church that Paul includes in his writings. And that song was something that you would sing in a very difficult moment, maybe even when somebody that you knew had been martyred. Maybe you were in the midst of persecution, because the early Christians faced this all the time. How did those early Christians face the fear of being attacked or beaten up or thrown in jail? How did they face that fear? They sang. They rejoiced. And that joy pulled them up above the circumstances, and they were able to walk in peace and love and joy. They were able to be sustained because they praised God and they sang. I saw this lived out when I was in China several years ago. I actually got to go and spend time with some of the persecuted Christians in that part of the world, because in China, the government doesn't allow Christians to meet openly. And so typically they meet in homes, they meet in secret. And in the middle of a conference in China, they began to sing. They didn't have any instruments, they didn't have drums, they didn't have loudspeakers. They just all sang in unison with their voices. But guess what they were singing about? They were singing about what a joy it would be to be a martyr for the Lord. They were singing about martyrdom. And I learned something in that moment, that Christians in difficult parts of the world, places where the gospel is illegal, they rejoice and they sing. And there's a sound of joy and laughter and praise in the midst of very difficult places and times. And so I want to challenge you as you study this chapter. I want to ask that the Lord would kindle the joy of the Lord in your heart, that you would learn how to turn on the joy when you're going through difficult times, and let the joy of the Lord be your strength. So God bless you as you study this chapter.